In Chapter 2 of Orientalism, Edward Said explores deeper into the mechanisms that sustain and develop Orientalism as a discourse. Titled Orientalist Structures and Restructures, this chapter explores how knowledge about the Orient evolved and became institutionalized in the West. By examining historical figures, academic disciplines, and cultural representations, Syed demonstrates how Orientalism is not merely a collection of ideas but an organized system with enduring influence. Syed situates the emergence of modern Orientalism in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, a time marked by European imperial expansion. He identifies the Napoleonic expedition to Egypt as a pivotal moment, signifying the integration of scholarly study and colonial ambition. Napoleon's campaign was not just a military endeavor, but also a cultural one supported by scholars who documented, categorized, and interpreted the Orient for Western audiences. During this period, Orientalism transitioned from a loosely defined interest in the East to a more structured academic discipline. Scholars like Silvestre de Sassi and Ernest Renan played key roles in shaping this field. Their work established a foundation of linguistic, philological, and anthropological studies, which were later institutionalized in universities, libraries, and colonial administrations. This institutionalization gave Orientalism a veneer of scientific credibility, enabling it to influence policy and governance in the colonies. De Sacy and Renan are central figures in Syed's analysis of modern Orientalism. Sacy, a French linguist, is credited with developing a systematic approach to studying Oriental languages. His works, particularly in grammar and lexicography, laid the groundwork for future Oriental scholarship. His method emphasized rationality, clarity, and organization, presenting the Orient as an object to be dissected and understood through Western frameworks. Renan, another French scholar, extended this legacy by combining linguistic studies with broader cultural and racial theories. He portrayed the Orient as static and inferior, contrasting it with the dynamic and progressive West. His work exemplifies how Orientalist scholarship often reinforced stereotypes and justified colonial domination. Through their contributions, De Sacy and Renan established Orientalism as a field of study that was both academically rigorous and ideologically driven. A significant portion of Chapter 2 is dedicated to the concept of Oriental residence, which refers to the practice of European scholars and administrators living in the East. This experience, Syed argues, added a layer of authority to their representations of the Orient. Figures like Edward William Lane, who wrote an account of the manners and customs of the modern Egyptians, exemplify how residency was used to claim authenticity and expertise. Syed critiques this approach for its inherent biases. Even when based on first-hand observations, these representations were filtered through Western perspectives, perpetuating a view of the Orient as exotic, backward, and in need of Western intervention. The truth presented by Oriental residents was not neutral. It was shaped by the broader discourse of Orientalism, which framed the East as the other. Orientalism's power lies in its ability to educate and shape perceptions. The works of Orientalist scholars were often didactic, aimed at teaching Western audiences about the East. This pedagogical aspect is evident in the anthologies, grammars, and translations produced by figures like De Sacy. These texts were not merely informative, they were prescriptive, presenting a curated and controlled image of the Orient. The didactic nature of Orientalist texts also reinforced the authority of the scholar over the subject. By selecting and interpreting fragments of Oriental culture, these scholars claimed to represent the entirety of the East. This process of fragmentation and reconstruction allowed the West to define the Orient on its own terms, effectively silencing the voices of the people it sought to describe. Syed argues that modern Orientalism was a shift from religious to secular frameworks, while earlier European views of the East were shaped by Christian theology. Modern Orientalism relied on scientific and rationalist methodologies. This secularization was evident in disciplines like philology, anthropology, and archaeology, which sought to study the Orient as a subject of empirical inquiry. However, he points out that this secular approach did not eliminate biases. Instead, it replaced religious prejudices with cultural and racial stereotypes. For instance, Orientalist studies often portrayed Eastern societies as inherently despotic, stagnant, and irrational. These characterizations justified colonial rule by framing it as a civilizing mission. A recurring theme in Chapter 2 is the relationship between knowledge and power. Drawing on Foucault's concept of discourse, Syed explains how Orientalism functions as a system that produces and perpetuates power dynamics. By controlling knowledge about the Orient, the West was able to assert its dominance over the East. This control extended beyond academia to include literature, art, and policy. He emphasizes that Orientalism is not merely a collection of stereotypes, but a structured system with real world implications. The knowledge produced by Orientalist scholars influenced colonial governance, shaping policies that impacted millions of lives. For example, British and French administrators relied on Orientalist texts to manage their colonies, using them to justify and legitimize their rule. Despite its historical roots, Orientalism remains relevant in contemporary contexts. He notes that many of the assumptions and stereotypes established during the 19th century persist in modern representations of the East. Media portrayals, political rhetoric, and academic studies continue to draw on Orientalist tropes, perpetuating a view of the Orient as exotic, dangerous, and inferior. Syed calls for a critical examination of these narratives, urging scholars and readers to question the system of knowledge that shaped their understanding of the world. By deconstructing Orientalism, he hopes to pave the way for more equitable and nuanced engagements with the East. Chapter 2 of Orientalism provides a detailed analysis of the structures and mechanisms that sustain Orientalism as a discourse. Through historical examples and theoretical insights, Syed reveals how knowledge about the Orient is produced, institutionalized, and wielded as a tool of power. The works of scholars like Desesi and Renan exemplify the academic rigor and ideological biases that characterize Orientalism, while the concept of Oriental residence highlights the complexities of representation.